In this video, we're going to take the time to go over standard actions, Java beans, and the expression language. Now, we've already seen a few of the JSP standard actions in play, as well as a little bit of the expression language when we turned off scripting. So some of this may look a little familiar to you, and that's good, but what we're going to do is take a closer look at these subjects, and then we'll be able to use them going forward in our systems. We're also going to introduce the Java bean specification, and how we can build classes that we'll be able to easily access through our code. So we'll take a look first at the JSP standard actions. We'll then cover the Java bean structure and the specifications of how to create a Java bean, and then we'll go into the expression language syntax to finish up the lecture. So starting with JSP standard actions, we've already seen a couple of them. They're available to us on all of our JSP pages. They contain a markup-like or a tag-like language format, which means that they're going to have a less than and a tag and a colon and then the method name. So what we'll see is standard actions take the form of JSP, colon, whatever the operator is, such as include or forward, which we've already seen those two. And they're predefined, so they're available to our page without us doing anything else. The most common standard actions that we're going to be taking a look at throughout our systems would be include, which of course brings in resources such as pages, forwarding, which we can use to move the request to a new page or a new servlet, and then we're going to get some new ones that we haven't seen. The use bean is going to be how we're going to be able to work directly with objects in our JSP page. This use bean will either get a current bean object, either out of session or an attribute, and work with it, or it can actually create a new one if we need a new instance of the object. And then, of course, set property and get property are going to be able to access the bean object properties. It'll be very important that we follow the specifications on our beans so that these methods will actually work, and we'll see that when we start looking at the bean here in a moment. There are some other standard actions that we aren't going to pay too much attention to, but we should be aware of. These standard actions are also available to us. We can use them to work with XML documents, for instance. We can have the JSP element or the JSP attribute or the JSP body if we want to create an element or add attributes to an element or build an entire XML document body. There's also a JSP text, which allows us to do some template text inside of a JSP page, and a JSP plugin that we could use to embed objects on our page if we wanted to do that. The next thing we're going to look at then is Java beans. So we'll be using Java beans as our models going forward because the Java bean is nothing more than a Java class that we write in code to model an object. The difference is, in order for the Java bean to be considered a valid bean, it must follow a certain specification. First of all, it must be serializable. In order to be put into session or translated through a stream, of course, it needs to be serializable. The Java bean must contain a default no-argument constructor. Even if it contains other constructors, there has to be that basic default constructor because of the fact that our useBean property needs to be able to access it very easily without having to know anything else about the constructor. As a convention, all of the Java bean properties have to start with either get or set in their name, with the exception of the primitive Boolean type, which can be is and then the property name. So if I had a property named name, for instance, if I wanted to have my accessor, I would say get name, and my set would be set name, a mutator. And of course, with Booleans, it could be is property or is name. The other properties should be named in camel case. You should follow conventions for toString, things like that are pretty straightforward. I want to point out one thing about these Java beans that we're talking about here. These are not the same thing as an enterprise Java bean, which we may have heard about in the past. Those Java bean types are persistence objects usually that are hosted by a service. And we're not building those types of Java beans in this case. We're talking about a Java bean that is simply an object model to a specification. Finally, let's take a quick look at the expression language, which again, we've already seen a few things with expression language. We need to know what's most important is that they're wrapped with the $sign, a left bracket, and then whatever the accessor information that we're using is. Could be an object, it could be a session object, it could be one of our own beans, and we can chain together to get to properties using the expression language, and then we close that with the right bracket. So we can use that to do code, to express information out to the page, or to work with our implicit objects. Of course, that means that we do get direct access to our objects or our beans, and we can get to every scope through those implicit objects, just like we saw before. The expression language is nice because it's simple and it's powerful, and you don't even have to know Java to use it. So if you were working with a designer, for instance, and the designer needed to be able to modify your page, they could use the expression language as long as you've given them the specifications of your object. They should be able to use the expression language without even knowing Java and be able to get the information from your object and render it on the page that they're designing. So that really wraps up our quick look at the three different things that we're talking about today: standard actions, Java beans, and expression language. So just in summary, we have our standard actions, which give us common access to different properties that we'll need throughout our pages, such as include and forward, and they have the same syntax in there implicit on the page for us. Java beans is going to be the specification we use to build our models going forward so that we can have easy access to them either through the standard actions or the expression language. The expression language is, again, a nice, simple, syntactical way for anyone to interact with objects on the JSP page.